Millionaire stops roadside for fruit and freezes when a single dad says her name loud sudden. Before we get into it, let's make this moment global. Leave a comment in your own language. The morning always started the same way. Before the sun had fully committed to rising, before the birds had settled on which song to sing, Oliver Reed was already at work. He woke at 4:30 without an alarm. His body had long since learned to skip that luxury, and moved through the small trailer in the dark, with the quiet efficiency of a man who has memorized every step, every creak, every corner of his world. He made coffee in a chipped blue mug. He checked on Aileen. He stood in the doorway of her room for exactly as long as he allowed himself, watching the slow rise and fall of her small chest. Her auburn curls fanned out across the pillow like something delicate and irreplaceable. Then he turned away, drank his coffee standing at the kitchen window, and got to work. He had been selling fruit on Route 9 for 3 years. The stand was a simple thing. 2 wooden tables he had built himself from reclaimed lumber, a hand-painted sign that read, "Reed's Fresh Fruit," in uneven block letters that Aileen had helped him color in last summer, and a green canvas canopy that had survived 2 seasons of hard rain and one particularly angry windstorm that had blown it halfway across the gravel shoulder before Oliver had chased it down and anchored it with cinder blocks. He sold peaches, strawberries, blueberries, whatever was in season, plus a rotating selection of jarred preserves he made on Sunday evenings while Aileen slept. It was not a glamorous living. It was barely a living at all, on most days. But it was his, and he kept it honest, and that had always been enough. Aileen was 6 years old. She had her mother's eyes, green, deep, the kind that looked like they were always thinking about something they weren't saying. And she had Oliver's stubbornness, which expressed itself differently at her age, mostly in the form of insisting on choosing her own outfits and refusing to eat anything orange unless it was an actual orange. She came to the stand with him on weekends and on days when the neighbor, Mrs. Pollard, couldn't watch her. On those days, Aileen sat on an overturned crate behind the second table with a coloring book and a thermos of apple juice, and she talked to every customer who came within 3 feet of her, whether they wanted conversation or not. Oliver had watched more than once as a stone-faced commuter stopped for a pint of blueberries and left 10 minutes later having been fully briefed on Aileen's opinions about clouds, her stuffed rabbit named Gerald, and the moral failures of the cartoon villain she was currently most concerned about. She had a gift. He recognized it because it was nothing like him. This particular Tuesday in June started like any other. Oliver had the stand set up by 6:15. The strawberries were front and center. It was peak season, and he had gotten a good flat from the Murillo farm the evening before. He had already made 4 sales by 7 o'clock, mostly to early commuters who barely slowed down, grabbing a pint with one hand and pressing exact change into his palm with the other. He was fine with that. He wasn't a man who needed to be talked to. He restocked, arranged, wiped down the table surface with a clean rag, and waited. The morning moved in its ordinary way, the way good mornings do when a man has arranged his life carefully enough to deserve them. Then, at 7:48, he noticed the time because a red pickup had just pulled away, and he had glanced at the small clock clipped to the canopy support. A black Mercedes SUV eased off the road onto the gravel with the slow, deliberate precision of a driver not entirely sure why she had stopped. Dark-tinted windows. New model. The kind of vehicle that cost more than Oliver had earned in the last 4 years combined. It sat with the engine running for a moment, as if reconsidering, and then the driver's door opened. She was young. 28, maybe, though she carried herself with the settled certainty of someone who had never been uncertain about much. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, dark slacks, low heels that were impractical for gravel, but that she navigated without looking down. Her hair was dark and pulled back. She had the look of someone who ran things, the set of the jaw, the steadiness of the eyes, the faint tension around the mouth that comes from spending too many years making decisions that other people spent their energy second-guessing. She walked toward the stand without smiling, scanning the produce with the efficient gaze of someone evaluating a report rather than buying fruit. "How much for the strawberries?" she said. It was not really a question. $4 a pint, Oliver said. 3 pints for 10. She picked one up, turned it, set it back down. "These local?" Murillo Farm, about 8 miles north, picked yesterday afternoon. She nodded slightly as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then she looked at him. Really looked for the first time. And something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. A slight narrowing. A quiet reevaluation. Oliver had seen that look before. More times than he could count. It was the look people got when they realized the man selling fruit on the side of the road was not entirely what they had expected. He didn't know what gave it away. Maybe the stillness, maybe something in his eyes. He had been told once in a different life that his eyes made people uncomfortable, not in a frightening way, but in the way a mirror does when you catch it by surprise. "I'll take 3 pints," she said. He bagged them and gave her the price. She handed him a $100 bill without looking at it. He made change from the metal cash box under the table. Exact change, counted once, then once more out of habit. He handed it to her. She glanced at it, then back at him. And that was when the black Audi pulled in behind her Mercedes. The man who stepped out of the Audi was named Garrison Holt. Oliver didn't know that yet, but he would learn it soon enough. Holt was in his mid-50s, thick through the shoulders, with silver hair swept back from a broad forehead, and the kind of tan that doesn't come from outdoor work, but from winter homes in warm places. He wore a linen shirt the color of cream and Italian shoes that had no business on a gravel shoulder. Shoes he navigated without noticing. Because men like Holt had long since stopped noticing things that inconvenienced them. He moved with the loose confidence of someone who had not been told no in a very long time, who had over years mistaken wealth for authority, until the two things fused together in his mind into something indistinguishable. He walked past the woman without acknowledging her and planted himself in front of the stand the way a man plants himself in a doorway, to make a point about who belongs there. "You the one who's been here 3 years?" he said. Oliver looked at him steadily. "I am. You got a permit for this location?" "I do." Holt smiled the way certain men smile when they're about to say something they've already decided can't be argued with. "Well," he said, "that permit is going to be a problem. I've just purchased the commercial corridor on this side of Route 9, all of it, and I intend to develop it." He gestured at the stand with a slight tilt of his hand, the dismissive gesture of a man sweeping crumbs off a table. "That means this won't be here much longer." Oliver said nothing. He had learned through years of hard practice that silence was more powerful than most people expected. He simply looked at Garrison Holt the way a man looks at weather, noting it, measuring it, deciding what it means for the day ahead. Holt seemed to anticipate resistance, or at least agitation. He got neither, and the absence of it appeared to bother him in ways he couldn't name. He looked at the stand, at the hand-painted sign, at the crate where Aileen had left her coloring book that morning. Then he looked back at Oliver with the particular contempt that powerful men reserve for men like this, men who have very little and seem remarkably settled within it. "I'd plan accordingly," Holt said. "You've got maybe 60 days. He said it loudly enough for the woman at the edge of the stand to hear, loudly enough for the 2 other customers who had pulled over to hear. A performance dressed as a conversation. Oliver looked at him for one long, unhurried moment. Then he turned to the nearest customer, a woman in scrubs who had stopped for peaches, and said, "These are the Reliance variety. Freestone. They'll be sweet all the way through." He handed her the bag. He made her change. He did not look back at Garrison Holt. Holt stood there for 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked back to his Audi. When Oliver finally glanced back toward where the Mercedes had been parked, the woman in the blazer had not left. She was standing beside her car with the door open, watching him with the expression of someone running a calculation they hadn't expected to need. He looked directly at her and he said quietly but clearly, "Have a safe drive, Ms. Holt." The color drained from her face. She stared at him. "How do you know my name?" Oliver said nothing more. He turned back to his stand, straightened a row of pints, and waited for the next customer. Behind him, he heard the soft crunch of her heels on gravel, then the closing of a car door, then the sound of an engine pulling away onto the road. He had not told anyone her name. He had not needed to. He had simply known it. The way he knew everything, once something had been given to him to keep. Every word, Every detail, every face, all of it filed away perfectly in the extraordinary vault of his memory, silent and waiting, the way certain things wait until they are needed. What he had not expected was that she would come back, and what neither of them could have known, standing on that ordinary gravel shoulder on an ordinary June morning, was that everything, every careful wall, every buried year, every hidden and carefully guarded thing, was about to come undone. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. Oliver Reed knew it the way he knew the weight of a full flat of peaches, the way he knew the sound the trailer made at 2 a.m. when the wind came in hard off the ridge, not as information but as something worn into the body so deep it no longer required thought. He was tired in the way that men get tired when they have been doing everything alone for long enough that they can no longer clearly remember what it felt like to have help. Not miserable, not broken, just permanently, quietly tired. The way an old bridge gets tired, still standing, still holding, still, but aware in its very structure of every load it has ever carried. He had been alone with Aileen for 2 years and 4 months. Her mother, Dana, had not been a bad person. He wanted to be clear about that in his own mind, because it mattered to him to be fair, even in thoughts no one else would ever hear. Dana had been young and frightened of a life that turned out to be smaller than she had imagined, and ultimately unable to choose it. She had left on a Thursday morning while Aileen was at the neighbor's. She left a note on the kitchen counter, $200 in cash, and the particular silence of a house that has just had something essential removed from it. Oliver had read the note once, folded it, and put it in the kitchen drawer. He had not read it again. There was nothing in it that required a second reading. In the months that followed, he had figured things out the way he figured out everything, methodically, without complaint, one problem at a time. He had found the trailer park on Hessler Road because the rent was low, and the manager, an old man named Bert, didn't ask many questions and had once, without being asked, shoveled the walkway to Oliver's door after a February ice storm. He had found the fruit stand because the overhead was minimal and the work was outdoors, and because he needed something that fit around Aileen's schedule without requiring anyone else's permission or goodwill. He had found Mrs. Pollard, 67, retired schoolteacher, sharp as new wire and absolutely delighted by Aileen, through the church community board that he attended not out of religion, but out of practicality, because communities were useful, and Oliver Reed was nothing if not practical. The days had a shape now, and he held that shape carefully. Up at 4:30, stand open by 6, Aileen to school by 8 on weekdays, Mrs. Pollard collecting her at 3. Home by 5:30, sometimes 6. Dinner, simple food, cooked from scratch because it was cheaper and because he had always liked the focus of it. The clean relationship between effort and outcome. Homework with Aileen at the kitchen table, which reliably turned into conversation, which was the part of every day he guarded most carefully and valued most quietly. Aileen in bed by 8:30. Then Oliver alone, cleaning up, preparing for the next morning, sometimes making preserves, sometimes sitting in the single armchair by the window with a library book, sometimes simply sitting with his thoughts in the way that men who carry large things learn to sit with them. Lights out by 10. Then the whole machinery of it beginning again. People drove past his stand and saw a man selling fruit on the side of the road. They did not see the legal pad he kept behind the cash box. Income, expenses, margin. The careful arithmetic of a man who understood exactly how thin the line was between staying and falling. They did not see him standing in the cereal aisle for 4 full minutes, not because he couldn't decide, but because he was doing the math in his head, comparing price per ounce between 2 boxes, and calculating which one represented the better decision for the next week's budget. They did not see him decline a free cup of coffee from the woman at the diner counter who offered it with genuine kindness, not out of pride, but out of the clear-eyed understanding that pity, once accepted, changes the nature of every transaction that follows. He was not a man who wanted to be felt sorry for. He was a man who wanted to be left alone to do what he had decided to do, which was raise his daughter honestly and owe nothing to no one and keep his word in a world where keeping your word had become remarkable enough to be surprising. The morning after Garrison Holt's visit, Oliver was back at the stand at his usual hour. He had spent the previous evening reviewing the permit paperwork he kept in a manila folder in the single file cabinet by the door. Everything in order, as he had expected. He had also made 2 phone calls, one to the county permits office to ask, calmly and specifically, about the procedural requirements for commercial corridor reclassification applications on Route 9. The other to a man whose name he did not use when he left the message, a man he had not spoken to in 4 years, who he trusted would understand everything necessary simply from hearing his voice on the recording. Aileen had noticed something was different. She always did. She had this quality, a kind of emotional sonar, a capacity for reading the temperature of a room or a person without being told a single word. She had climbed into his lap after dinner, ostensibly to show him a drawing, but she had stayed longer than the drawing required. She had reached up and put one small hand flat against his cheek, the way she sometimes did, not saying anything, just holding it there, as if she were checking something important. "You okay, Daddy?" she had said. "I'm good," he had said. And he had meant it, in the way that fathers mean it when they say it to their children. Not as a lie, as a decision, as a promise made in the only direction that truly matters. She had studied him for a moment longer, with the earnest skepticism of a child who is not entirely satisfied with an answer, but has decided to extend grace anyway. Then she had shown him the drawing, which turned out to be a picture of the 2 of them at the fruit stand, rendered in crayon with the cheerful architectural freedom of a first grader's imagination. He was tall and brown and slightly rectangular. She was small and orange-haired and appeared to be holding either a strawberry or a small red sun. Above them, in careful capital letters, she had written, "Me and Daddy." He had taped it to the refrigerator while she slept. The black Mercedes came back on Thursday. Oliver saw it from 100 yards away, easing off Route 9 with that same quality of last-moment decision, as if the driver kept making the choice to stop only when the exit was already underneath her. He continued explaining to an older gentleman the difference between 2 peach varieties and did not change his posture or his expression. He was good at that. He had spent years developing the ability to be entirely undisturbed on the outside, regardless of what was turning quietly within. And at this point, the skill had become involuntary, as natural and unremarkable as breathing. She walked up to the stand. Same blazer, different color, navy today. She looked like someone who had not slept particularly well, which he noted the way he noted everything. "How do you know my name?" she said. No preamble, no small talk, direct. He respected that. "Good morning," he said. "The Reliance peaches are in. Better than the strawberries right now if you want something worth stopping for." She stared at him. "I'm serious." "I know you are." He set a peach on the table between them. $4 each or 3 for 10. A silence moved between them. Not uncomfortable, at least not for him. She looked at the peach. She looked at him. He could see her working through something methodically, sorting variables, which was the behavior of an intelligent person who has encountered an unanticipated problem and is trying to fit it into a framework that makes sense. He found it interesting to watch. He didn't let that show either. "Garrison Holt was just here 2 days ago," she said finally. "Holt is not an uncommon name. You could have heard it from someone and made an educated guess. You could tell yourself that," he said pleasantly. Her jaw tightened. "Then explain it. I'd rather sell you peaches." She bought 3. She didn't leave right away. She stood at the edge of the stand looking at the hand-painted sign, at the careful arrangement of the fruit, at the small crayon drawing of a roadside stand that Aileen had made the previous week, and that Oliver had pinned to the canopy support with a binder clip, because Aileen had specifically requested prominent display, and he did not deny his daughter her reasonable requests. "That your daughter's?" she said, nodding at the drawing. "Yes." "She comes here with you?" "Weekends, some weekdays." Alicia looked at the drawing for a moment. Something moved through her expression that she caught and controlled quickly. Something soft and unguarded that arrived and was gone almost before it had a name. She tucked it away with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had spent years teaching herself exactly that. "Garrison is going to come back," she said. It was not a warning. It was a weather report from someone who knew the climate well. "I expect so," Oliver said. "He doesn't stop when he decides on something." "Neither do I," Oliver said. And he said it without heat, without posturing, without anything at all except the flat and simple weight of a fact. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag and walked back to her car. He watched her go with the same expression he'd worn throughout. Calm, present, giving nothing away. But as her car eased back onto Route 9, he did something he rarely permitted himself. He let himself think, fully and without restraint, about what he actually knew. He knew that Alicia Holt was not Garrison Holt's daughter in any uncomplicated sense. He knew she had built her first company at 22 from a 2-room rented office and a loan she had co-signed herself. He knew she had not spoken to her father for 14 months before a shared business dispute had pulled them back into reluctant proximity. He knew her middle name, the name of her college roommate, the nonprofit she funded anonymously, the book she had recommended publicly 3 times without ever citing the chapter that had actually changed the way she thought. He knew it all because he had read it once, a long profile in a financial journal that most people never picked up. And what Oliver Reed read, Oliver Reed kept. Every word, every name, every detail, permanently and with perfect fidelity, as if his mind were a room from which nothing was ever allowed to leave. He had never intended to use any of it. He had not planned on a lot of things. And now the daughter of the man who wanted to take everything from him was buying peaches twice a week from his stand, and something told him, the same quiet instinct that had kept him alive through situations far more dangerous than a zoning dispute, that the story was only beginning to find the shape it had always been moving toward. Garrison Holt returned on a Friday afternoon. He brought 2 men Oliver did not recognize, and a county official named Perkins, who had the particular look of a man who has been asked to do something he knows is wrong, but has calculated, in the bloodless arithmetic of self-preservation, that the cost of refusal is higher than the cost of compliance. It was the kind of calculation Oliver had seen made many times, in many different rooms and circumstances, and he had never respected it, though he understood it completely. Understanding was not the same as forgiving. It never had been. Aileen was at the stand. It was a school holiday, and Mrs. Pollard had a doctor's appointment, so Aileen had been with him since morning, conducting what she described as a very important scientific investigation into the personality of a caterpillar she had discovered on the table leg. She had named it Barnaby. She had briefed 4 separate customers on Barnaby's character traits, which she described as cautious but warm. She was at this moment working on a crayon portrait of him, tongue pressed firmly to her upper lip. Oliver saw the vehicles while they were still 100 yards out, and knew with that unhurried, unsettling certainty that had always been part of him exactly what this was. He looked at his daughter. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay on your crate for a little while, okay? Right where you are. Don't come around front." She looked up at him, and in the way that she had always looked at him, the way that still, after 6 years, had the power to undo something quietly in his chest. She read his face and found what she needed. Not fear, not defeat. Just her father, composed and present, preparing for something with the unhurried steadiness of a man who has prepared for hard things before and knows how it is done. "Is something bad happening?" she asked. "Something boring," he said. "Business. You keep an eye on Barnaby." She accepted this, though she kept one ear aimed in his direction with the elegant subtlety of a 6-year-old who thinks she is being discreet. Oliver straightened, rolled his shoulders once, a habit, nothing more, and turned to face what was coming. Holt stepped out first, moving with the manner of a man conducting an inspection of something he has already decided he owns. Perkins emerged from the second car and immediately found something interesting to look at near his own shoes. The 2 attorneys, Oliver identified them by their suits, their posture, and the way they held their folders like props rather than tools, positioned themselves slightly behind Holt in the formation of men who are present to confer legitimacy, not to do anything themselves. "Mr. Reed," Holt said. He said it the way you say the name of something you are about to move out of your way. "Mr. Holt," Oliver said. Holt nodded at Perkins, who cleared his throat and produced a document. Mr. Reed, this is a notice of contested permit status, filed under Section 14C of the County Commercial Corridor Ordinance. The developer has submitted an application for reclassification of this stretch of Route 9, which, if approved, would end your operation here, Holt said, shortcutting the procedural language in the way men do when they have decided that the formalities are a courtesy they are choosing to perform rather than a process they are obligated to respect. He looked at Oliver's stand, the tables, the sign, the canopy, the crate with Aileen's coloring book on it, and then he looked at Oliver with the settled, finished contempt of a man who has already moved past this moment in his mind. You've had a decent run. 3 years is a decent run for a roadside stand. But this land is going to become something that actually serves this community. Retail, infrastructure, real development. A pause. Not fruit on a folding table. One of the attorneys extended the notice. Oliver took it. He read it in approximately 30 seconds, fully without moving his lips, missing nothing. Then he set it down on the table beside a row of peaches. I have 60 days to respond, he said. You can respond all you like, Holt said. The application has already been submitted, and preliminary approval has not been granted. Oliver's voice did not change in register or pace. Preliminary review was completed. Approval requires a public comment period of 30 days and a hearing before the county board. The next scheduled board hearing is September 19th. He looked at Perkins. That's correct? Perkins blinked. Yes, that's correct. Holt looked at Oliver with the slight recalibration of a man who has pushed against something and found it unexpectedly solid. He recovered quickly. Men like Holt always did. They had long practice in recovering from surprises while looking as if the surprise had never occurred. The board will approve it, he said flatly. I've worked in this county for 20 years. I know how these processes go. I'm sure you do, Oliver said. Evenly, without irony, without heat, which was somehow, as Holt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, worse than either. And then, from behind the second table, in the clear, carrying, completely uncurated voice of a child who has no concept of silence or the weight of it, Aileen said, Daddy? Barnaby moved to a different leaf. Is he okay or is he just exploring? Holt turned toward the sound. He saw her, small, red-haired, crouched earnestly over her leaf, asking her question with complete sincerity and not a trace of self-consciousness. Something moved through his face. It was brief and complicated, and he controlled it quickly. The way he controlled everything, but it had been there. Oliver had seen it. He always saw things like that. He filed it away without expression. Holt looked back at him. Get your affairs in order, Mr. Reed, he said. He turned and walked back toward his car. The attorneys followed. Perkins lingered for half a second, long enough to meet Oliver's eyes with a look that contained what might have been apology, or might simply have been the discomfort of a man who has made a choice he knows he will not be proud of. And then he too left. Aileen appeared at Oliver's side approximately 3 seconds after the last car door closed. She put her hand in his and stood looking at the empty gravel. That man was mean, she said. He wants something, Oliver said. What does he want? This spot. She considered this with the gravity it deserved. Our spot? Our spot. A pause. Then, with the solemn directness of a child who has not yet learned to soften things, Can he have it? Not without a fight, Oliver said. She tightened her hand around his fingers, his large, rough, warm fingers, and she said, with the absolute and uncomplicated conviction of someone who has not yet learned that certainty costs something, Good, because I don't want to move, Barnaby. Oliver looked down at his daughter. A feeling moved through him, vast and wordless, the kind that has no clean name. Love and grief and gratitude and the terrifying awareness of how much this small person meant and how completely he could not afford to fail her. He let it move through rather than trying to hold it. He put his hand on top of her head gently, briefly, the way he always did. Barnaby's not going anywhere, he said. That evening, after Aileen was asleep, Oliver sat at the kitchen table with the notice spread open before him and a legal pad beside it. He worked for 2 hours. He wrote out the permit timeline, the relevant sections of the county ordinance, the specific procedural thresholds that Holt's application would have to clear, the board composition, the public comment submission requirements. He knew most of it from memory. He verified the rest. When he was finished, he had 4 pages of precise, unhurried notes in his small handwriting, and a fairly complete picture of exactly what the next 60 days would require of him. He also had, sitting quietly in a back corner of his extraordinary mind, a name, a case. Something from 11 years ago that had never appeared in the local news because it had been settled quietly and quickly by men who preferred quiet and quick, but that he had read about in a legal review journal he'd found in a waiting room and had not set down until the last page. At which point he had retained everything in it with his usual completeness. The case involved Garrison Holt, a contractor, a county permit obtained through a process that, had it been argued before a judge, rather than resolved by settlement, would have carried a different name than negotiation. He had never told anyone. He had filed it away the way he filed everything, not for use, just for keeping, because Oliver Reed had learned, in a life that had required him to learn things that most men are fortunate enough to never need, that information was the only currency that didn't spoil, didn't inflate, didn't diminish with time, and couldn't be taken from a man simply because he had less than the man across the table. He folded the legal pad. He turned off the kitchen light. He stood in the hallway outside Aileen's room and listened to the sound of her breathing in the dark, that steady, unhurried rhythm, the sound of someone who had not yet learned what there was to be afraid of, and he let himself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of everything that was at stake. This stand, this routine, this careful, honest, hard-won life he had built from almost nothing, for both of them. The weight was real and considerable. He acknowledged it the way a man acknowledges something true. Then he set it down, because carrying things into sleep had never solved anything, and he needed to be sharp in the morning. He did not yet know that across town, in a hotel suite that cost more per night than he earned in a week, Alicia Holt was sitting at a desk with her laptop open, a half-eaten peach on the plate beside her going soft in the warm room air. And his name searched for the 3rd time in 3 days. She was finding what she had found the previous 2 times. Almost nothing. A county business permit. A library card registration from 8 years ago in a different state. And one more thing, buried deep, that required knowing where to look. A single line in a government document. Heavily redacted, from an agency whose name she recognized but whose specific work she had never needed to understand. A commendation record, classified, his name, and a series of numbers and a date and a description that had been blacked out entirely. She stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called someone she trusted more than almost anyone. And she said 4 words, quiet and certain. Find out who he is. The thing about honor is that nobody sees it. That was the part they never told you. The part left out of every speech, every ceremony, every handshake in a room full of people who believed they were witnessing something. Honor, real honor, the kind that costs something, happens in private. It happens at 4:30 in the morning when no one is watching. It happens in the cereal aisle when you do the arithmetic instead of just reaching. It happens when a man 3 times your net worth tries to unsettle you in front of your 6-year-old daughter, and you look through him the way you'd look through fog. Not because you're not afraid, but because the fear is not the part you're going to show. Oliver Reed had been practicing that kind of honor for most of his adult life. He had learned it in places most men never go, and had carried it home to a life most men never imagined could coexist with those places. And now he was practicing it on a gravel shoulder on Route 9, with strawberries and peaches and a cash box and a kid who named caterpillars, and it was, in ways he had never expected to discover, the hardest version of it yet. The days after Garrison Holt's second visit carried a particular quality of pressure. Not loud, not dramatic, but constant. The kind of pressure you feel not as a single force but as a slow accumulation of small weights. Each one manageable, all of them together beginning to ask a question of a man's spine. 3 of Oliver's regular customers told him, gently, and with genuine regret, that they had heard about the development plans and weren't sure the stand would be worth stopping at much longer. One of them added, unprompted, that a man in Oliver's position might want to consider his options. Oliver thanked him for the peaches he had just purchased and told him he'd see him next week. He meant it. He was there the following Tuesday. So was the customer. A letter arrived from Holt's legal team, not to his home address, which they apparently did not have, but taped to the front of the stand's canopy frame on a Monday morning before he arrived. He found it when he was setting up at 6:15, the envelope crisp and cream-colored, and sealed with the kind of professional precision that is meant to communicate not just a message but a power differential. He opened it, read it once, and put it in the manila folder with the rest of the paperwork. It was a formal request that he vacate the premises by the end of the month, worded in legal language that stopped just short of being an actual legal demand, because Holt's attorneys apparently knew the difference and were calibrating accordingly. It was pressure designed to feel like inevitability. Oliver recognized the technique. He had seen it applied in far more consequential situations than this, and he had learned that the most effective response to manufactured inevitability was the same as the most effective response to most things. Continue doing your work. He continued doing his work. He was at the stand 6 days a week. He restocked, he arranged, he made change, he answered questions about varieties and seasons and what went best with what. He drove out to the Murillo farm on Wednesday evenings and loaded his truck in the gold light of late afternoon and talked with Marco Murillo about the soil and the rain and the forecast the way men talk when they have a shared interest in the same ground. He picked up Aileen on schedule. He made dinner. He did homework at the kitchen table. He read at night in the armchair by the window. He did not deviate. He did not accelerate. He did not retreat. He held his line the way a man holds a line when he has decided that the line is worth holding. And he did it without announcement. Because announcements were for people who needed witnesses. Aileen noticed the letters. Children notice things that adults believe they are hiding, and Aileen had always been especially good at this, at detecting the shape of something even when she couldn't name it. She saw him tuck the second envelope into his folder one morning and she said, from behind her coloring book without looking up, "Is that from the mean man?" "From his lawyers," Oliver said. "What's a lawyer?" "Someone who writes things down in a complicated way to make simple things sound scarier than they are." She considered this. "Can we write back?" "We're going to do something better than write back," he said. "What?" "Show up," he said, "every single day." She seemed to find this satisfying in a way that complex strategies never quite managed. She went back to her coloring. Oliver went back to his work. The morning continued the way mornings did, customer by customer, dollar by dollar, hour by hour. And in its continuation was a form of argument that no letter from a law firm could quite answer. Alicia came back on a Saturday. This time she brought no blazer, no work clothes. Jeans, a plain shirt, her hair down. She looked different. Not softer exactly, but less armored. Oliver noticed the change the way he noticed everything, and he noted it and filed it away and continued arranging a new delivery of late-season blueberries. Aileen was there. She saw Alicia approaching and, because she had seen her twice before from her crate and had been compiling observations, slid off the crate and walked directly to the edge of the table and said, with the solemnity of someone making a formal introduction, "Hi, I'm Aileen. My dad sells fruit and I am in charge of quality control." Alicia stopped. Something happened to her face. Not the controlled flash from before, but something that actually arrived and stayed for a moment. Real and unmanaged, like light through a briefly opened door. "Quality control," she said. "That sounds important." "It is," Aileen said. "You have to taste them before you buy them or you don't know if they're good. That's the rule." "Whose rule?" Aileen glanced at her father. "Mine," she said. "Daddy says it's not officially a rule, but I think that means it is unofficially." Oliver, without looking up from the blueberries. "It's a strong suggestion." "A very strong suggestion," Aileen confirmed and held out a blueberry with the gravity of a judge presenting evidence. Alicia took it. She ate it. She looked at Aileen. "It's good," she said. "I know," Aileen said. I already tested this batch. Oliver finally looked up. He and Alicia met eyes across the table, and there was something in that moment, brief, unspoken, the specific kind of communication that passes between adults in the presence of a child who is being irresistible, that was almost like ease. Almost like ordinary. He looked away first, back to the blueberries, because he was a man who was careful about almost. Alicia bought 2 pints of blueberries and a jar of preserves. Before she left, she looked at him with a directness she had apparently decided to stop moderating. I looked into your permit, she said. It's solid. The reclassification application has 3 procedural weaknesses. If someone filed formal objections at the right stages, it could stall the process by 8 months minimum, possibly kill it outright. Oliver looked at her. I know, he said. A beat. You already found them. Yes. She studied him for a moment, not with the reevaluating look of their first meeting, but with something more complicated than that, something that had more history in it. Who are you? She said. It was a genuine question, the most genuine she had asked him yet. I'm the man who sells fruit on Route 9, he said. She shook her head slowly, picked up her bag and walked back to her car. But this time, before she opened the door, she looked back. And what was in her face was not suspicion or confusion, or the professional assessment of someone cataloging a problem. It was something older and quieter than any of those things. It was the look of a person who has been searching for something for a long time, and has just caught the first faint scent of it, without yet being willing to name what it is. Oliver watched her car until it disappeared around the bend. Then he looked down at Aileen, who was watching the same spot with her arms folded and an expression of pronounced satisfaction on her face. I like her, Aileen announced. Oliver said nothing. He picked up a blueberry, ate it, and decided it was, in fact, very good. Aileen had chosen well. She almost always did. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 9 days after Oliver had left the message. He was washing dishes when the phone rang, and he knew before he answered it who it would be. Not because of the number, which was blocked, but because of the timing, which told him that the man on the other end had spent 9 days deciding how much of himself to put back into something he had also, carefully, put away. Oliver understood that kind of decision. He had made it himself in the opposite direction 6 years ago. He dried his hands on the dish towel and answered on the 3rd ring. You sound the same, said the voice. It was low and unhurried, with the particular quality of someone who had spent years speaking in environments where voices had to be controlled. So do you, Oliver said. You're selling fruit. I am. A pause. Not an uncomfortable one. More the kind of pause that passes between men who have so much history between them that silence is just another form of conversation. I heard, the voice said. Took me a while to locate you. You covered your tracks well. That was the idea. You have a daughter now. 6 years old, Oliver said. Her name is Aileen. She okay? She's the reason everything is okay, Oliver said simply. Another pause, then, what do you need? Information, Oliver said. Garrison Holt, county-level development approximately 11 years ago. A settlement. You'll know the one if you look. Holt, the voice repeated, as if tasting the name. That's a name I've come across. I thought you might have. Give me 72 hours. Take your time, Oliver said. And he meant it. He had learned long ago that urgency, performed or genuine, was a kind of leverage that the other party always noticed, and he had no interest in giving anyone any more leverage than they already had. He hung up. He finished the dishes. He went and looked in on Aileen, who was asleep with Gerald the rabbit tucked under her arm and Barnaby's leaf, still in the jar she had insisted they bring inside, sitting on the windowsill in the ambient light. He stood in the doorway for his customary moment, and then he went and sat in the armchair and he let himself think for the first time in a long time about who he had been before he was this. His name, for 12 years, had appeared in no newspaper, no public record, no searchable database. He had worked for a division of the federal government whose official name was unremarkable and whose actual function was considerably less so. He had been recruited at 22 after 2 years of military service that had produced a performance record that attracted the attention of people whose job it was to notice certain kinds of performance. What they had noticed in Oliver Reed was not physical courage, though he had that. It was not tactical instinct, though he had that too. What they had noticed, what had been identified in a series of assessments he had sat through without fully understanding their purpose, was his memory. It was not a trick. It was not a party skill or an anomaly or a curiosity. It was a complete and total retention of everything that entered his mind through any of his senses. Every word, every face, every number, every room he had ever stood in, every conversation he had ever been part of, every document he had ever read. Permanent, reliable, without effort and without error. The technical term was highly superior autobiographical memory, combined with a form of eidetic retention that the researchers who studied him said they had encountered in fewer than 40 documented cases in the world. Oliver had listened to that, noted it, and filed it the way he filed everything, not with particular pride or alarm, just as information about the nature of the tool he had been given to work with. He had used it for 12 years in the service of his country in ways he would not describe to anyone and had no interest in describing. He had sat across tables from men who believed they were in control of the conversation and had listened to everything they said and retained it perfectly and never once revealed what he was doing. He had walked through rooms and read documents in seconds that took other analysts hours. He had remembered faces from briefings 3 years prior and recognized them in airports, in restaurants, in crowds that were supposed to be anonymous. He had been, in the specific and limited world in which he operated, extraordinarily effective, and he had been utterly invisible in that effectiveness, which was the point, and which suited him exactly. He had left when Aileen was born. There was no drama in it and no ceremony. He had gone to the man above him, a man he respected, one of very few, and he had said that he was done, and the man had looked at him for a long time and then said, with the weariness of someone who had lost good people before and never entirely stopped feeling it, "I know." They had shaken hands. Oliver had walked out, driven to the hospital, and been in the room when Aileen opened her eyes for the first time, and that had been the end of one thing and the beginning of everything that actually mattered. He had not told Dana. He had told her he had worked in government analytics, which was technically true and practically uninformative, and she had not pressed him. And then she had left, and it had ceased to matter what she knew. He had not told Mrs. Pollard or Marco Murillo or any of the customers who stopped at the stand. He had not told anyone, because there was no one to tell, and because telling would have required explaining, and explaining would have required deciding which version of the truth to offer to someone who had no framework for the whole of it. He had told Aileen, in the way you tell a 6-year-old things that are true, simply, without elaboration, in pieces that fit her current capacity to understand. He had told her that before he sold fruit, he had a different job, a very important one, where he helped keep people safe. She had asked if it was like being a superhero. He had thought about it seriously, because she asked things seriously and deserved serious answers, and he had said, not exactly, but sort of, in the way that the most important things are done by people you never hear about. She had accepted this with the gravity it deserved and had gone back to her drawing. And he had felt in that moment both the weight of everything he had not said and the lightness of having offered her something real. The board hearing was 12 days away when Alicia came to the stand and asked him directly, "What did you do before this?" He looked at her. She had been coming every 2 or 3 days for 3 weeks now. She always bought something. She always stayed a few minutes longer than the transaction required. She had learned Aileen's rules about quality control and now submitted to the blueberry test with a solemnity that delighted Aileen completely. She had stopped asking about the name. She had accepted that he was not going to explain it, but she had not stopped being curious. He could see it in the way she watched him, the way she listened when he spoke to customers, the way she sometimes caught herself studying him with the focused attention of someone trying to solve a problem that keeps changing shape. "Why do you want to know?" he said. "Because you quote county ordinances from memory," she said. "Because you knew my name before we met. Because you're the calmest person I've ever seen in the face of someone like Garrison Holt, and I've seen a lot of people face Garrison Holt." She paused. "Because whoever you called, they called me. Last night. To tell me to stop looking. And I have never in my life been told to stop looking by someone with that kind of clearance." Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did you stop?" "No," she said, "but I thought you should know." He nodded slowly. He picked up a peach and turned it in his hand, the weight of it, the specific warmth of the skin, the exact color at the stem. He set it down. He looked at her steadily. "I worked for the federal government," he said, "for 12 years. I can't tell you the specifics, I won't. What I can tell you is that I left voluntarily, I left cleanly, and everything I did there, I did with my whole conscience intact." He let that sit. "I sold the house, bought the truck, and started over. Because my daughter needed a father who was present. Not occasionally, not in the margins. Present." He looked at her. "That's the whole story." Alicia looked at him for a long time. The morning traffic moved on Route 9 behind her. The ordinary, indifferent flow of a world that did not know or care what was happening on this gravel shoulder between these two people. In the space between a crate of peaches and everything that had been left unsaid for 12 years. Then she said very quietly, "The commendation record I found, the redacted one, that was you." It was not a question. He answered it anyway. "Yes." "What was it for?" He said nothing for a moment. Then, "For doing something difficult in a difficult place without losing the part of myself that I needed to bring home." She absorbed that. She looked at Aileen, who was on her crate explaining to a passing customer the precise difference between a caterpillar's preferences and a butterfly's preferences, and why this mattered enormously. Then she looked back at him with an expression that had shed every layer of management and strategy and professional composure. And what was underneath all of that was something simple and human and old. It was the look of a person who has just understood something they had not expected to understand. About a person they had not expected to see clearly. "Garrison doesn't know any of this," she said. "No," Oliver said, "but you have something on him. The settlement case." "I know about it," he said carefully. "I haven't decided what to do with knowing. The board hearing is in 12 days. I know. He's going to win that hearing." "Oliver." It was the first time she had used his name. He noticed. "I know the board. I know how he works. He will win it unless something changes the calculation." "Something might," he said. And the way he said it, without heat, without performance, with only the flat and patient certainty of a man who has decided, made her go still in the way that people go still when they realize they are in the presence of something they have underestimated. She left without another word, and Oliver stood at his stand in the morning sun with the Route 9 traffic moving behind him, and the full weight of 12 years sitting in his chest like something that had been waiting a long time for a reason to stand up. He looked at Aileen on her crate, small, red-haired, completely absorbed in her world, and he made the decision that had been forming, quietly and inevitably, since the first day a black Audi had pulled onto his gravel shoulder, and a silver-haired man had looked at his life and decided it was disposable. He made it the way he made everything. Without fanfare, without doubt, and without turning back. The county board hearing was held on a Thursday morning in a municipal building that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and decades of unexceptional decisions. The hearing room had 40 seats and a raised dais at the front, where 5 board members sat with the slightly dazed authority of people who had not anticipated a crowd. There was a crowd. Word had moved through the Route 9 community in the 10 days preceding the hearing in the organic, unstoppable way that word moves in small communities when something has touched a nerve. Quietly at first, then faster, then all at once. The woman from the diner had come. Marco Murillo was there with 2 of his farmhands. 3 of the regular morning commuters who had stopped for blueberries every Tuesday for 2 years sat together in the 4th row. Mrs. Pollard was in the front left, wearing her good cardigan, with Aileen beside her. Aileen, having been told that she was attending something important, and having responded to this information by putting on her best dress, and asking if she could bring Gerald the rabbit for moral support, which Oliver had allowed. Garrison Holt arrived 7 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin, with 4 attorneys, a county commissioner he had apparently brought as a kind of social anchor, and the smooth, untroubled bearing of a man who has done this many times and has never been surprised by the outcome. He took his seat at the applicant's table without looking around the room, because men like Holt had learned long ago that acknowledging a crowd was a form of concession. He did not look at Oliver, who was seated across the aisle with a single manila folder on the table in front of him, and no one beside him except his own composure. The board chair opened the proceedings. She was a woman in her late 60s named Hargrove, with reading glasses and a manner that was efficient without being unkind. She explained the process: applicant's presentation, public comment, respondent's statement, board deliberation, and asked if both parties were prepared. Holt's lead attorney said they were. Oliver said yes. Holt's team presented for 40 minutes. They had charts, renderings, projected tax revenue figures, a letter of support from the Chamber of Commerce, and the particular momentum of a prepared argument that has been rehearsed enough times to feel like gravity. It was professional and thorough and, taken on its own terms, persuasive. The board members made notes. The county commissioner in the third row nodded occasionally. Oliver sat and listened, and did not write a single word, because he did not need to. Then the board chair opened public comment. Marco Murillo spoke first. He spoke about the stand as a distribution point for local produce, about the relationship between small farms and the margins that a roadside stand like Oliver's provided, margins that did not exist in grocery chain negotiations. He spoke plainly and from experience, and he was believable because he was simply telling the truth about his own life. The woman from the diner spoke about the stand as a fixture, a constant, one of the things that made a stretch of highway feel like a place rather than a passage. 2 of the morning commuters spoke about character. The word they both reached for independently without consultation was reliable. Mrs. Pollard did not speak. She sat in the front row with Aileen beside her and her hands folded in her lap, and her presence made an argument that did not require words. Then the board chair looked at Oliver. Mr. Reed, your statement. Oliver stood. He opened the manila folder. He did not look at it. Board members, he said, I want to begin with something simple. I have operated this stand in full compliance with every applicable county ordinance for 3 years. My permit is valid. My taxes are current. My record is clean. Those facts are in the folder, and I'm happy to walk through any of them if the board has questions. He paused. But I want to address something else, something that I think is more important than a permit. He let the room settle. 11 years ago, he said, Garrison Holt's development company obtained a commercial corridor permit in this county through a process that was later settled out of court, following allegations of improper communication between the applicant and a sitting board member. The settlement amount was $430,000. The terms included a non-disclosure clause and an agreement that the matter would not be referenced in future permit proceedings. He looked at the board. I am not a lawyer. I can't tell you whether that clause extends to proceedings like this one. But I can tell you that I have the case number, the filing date, the name of the contractor who brought the original complaint, and the specific language of the settlement agreement. All of it, from memory, available for the record. The room was very quiet. Holt's lead attorney was on his feet. Board chair, this is irrelevant and prejudicial, and I object to. Sit down, Mr. Forsyth, Chair Hargrove said, with the patience of a woman who has heard many objections and is not impressed by volume. She looked at Oliver. Mr. Reed, are you prepared to submit documentation supporting those claims? The case number is CR 2014-0887. Filed in this county's civil court on March 4th of that year, Oliver said. The presiding clerk at the time was a woman named Deirdre Voss. The settlement was finalized September 12th. I can provide the name of the mediator, the docket entries, and the specific language of clauses 3 through 7 of the agreement if the board would find that useful. He looked at Hargrove steadily. I don't have paperwork with me. I don't need it. The hearing was recessed 40 minutes later pending a procedural review. It was the kind of recess that everyone in the room understood was not merely procedural. Holt's attorneys surrounded him at the table in the low, urgent conference of men, recalibrating under pressure. The county commissioner had gone very still. Chair Hargrove was speaking quietly to the board council, with the focused expression of someone who has just been handed a situation that requires care. Oliver sat at his table and closed his folder and waited. Aileen had found her way to his side during the recess. She had crossed the room with the sure-footed directness of a child who knows exactly where she belongs, and she put her hand on his arm and looked up at him and said, at a volume that was probably audible to the nearest 4 rows, "Did we win?" "Not yet," he said quietly. "But we're okay." She studied his face with her usual sonar precision, and apparently found what she was looking for, because she nodded with satisfaction and stayed beside him. Gerald the rabbit was tucked under her arm. She had, Oliver noticed, also brought Barnaby's leaf in the small Ziploc bag she had insisted upon that morning. He had not asked why. Some things didn't require asking. Alicia Holt was in the back row. He had seen her when he came in, and had not acknowledged her directly, and she had not acknowledged him. She had sat through the entire proceeding without expression, without movement, with the absolute stillness of a person watching something they knew was coming, and had already, in the privacy of their own conscience, made peace with. When their eyes met across the room during the recess, she gave him something that was not quite a nod, just the smallest tightening of acknowledgement. One person to another, across a room that contained her father's unraveling and a 6-year-old girl with a rabbit, and a man who had once served his country in silence, and was now serving his daughter in the same way. The reclassification application was denied 6 days later. The board issued a written decision, citing procedural irregularities in the original submission and a conflict of interest determination that required further review. Garrison Holt's attorneys filed a notice of intent to appeal. Oliver read the notice when it was forwarded to him by the county clerk's office, read it once, completely, set it down, and went back to arranging a new flat of peaches that Marco Murillo had delivered that morning. The appeal would take time. So would everything else worth having. He had time. He had always known how to use it. The morning after the decision arrived, Aileen asked him at breakfast, "Is the mean man going to leave our stand alone now?" "For a while," Oliver said. "Maybe longer." "Because you told the truth?" He looked at her across the kitchen table, her green eyes, her toast held in both hands, her complete and serene confidence in him that he had been quietly terrified of losing every day for 6 years, and that he intended, for as long as he drew breath, to deserve. "Because I told the truth," he said. "That's usually how it works when you're patient about it." She bit her toast. "Good," she said. "That's what I thought." Alicia came to the stand on a Saturday, 2 weeks after the decision. She wore no blazer. She brought coffee, 2 cups, from the diner down the road, which Oliver accepted without comment, because the context had changed and he understood context. She handed him the cup and stood beside the stand, rather than in front of it, which was also different, and which he also noted. They stood for a while without speaking. Route 9 moved in front of them in its ordinary way. The morning was clear and warm, and the peaches were exceptional, and a mockingbird in the tree line behind the stand was going through its entire repertoire with no apparent intention of stopping. Aileen was at school. The stand was quiet in the particular way it was quiet when she wasn't there. Functional, orderly, missing something bright. "I owe you an apology," Alicia said. "For what?" "For stopping here the first day because I wanted to see what he was dealing with. I told myself it was impulse. It wasn't. I wanted to assess you." She held her coffee in both hands. "I was working an angle. I didn't expect—" She stopped, started again. "I didn't expect you." Oliver looked at her. "What did you expect?" "Someone I could feel neutral about," she said. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "And Garrison?" She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the mockingbird completed one full cycle and began another. "He's my father," she said finally. "That's a fact I've spent a lot of years deciding what to do with." She looked at Oliver. "I think I've decided." He didn't ask what she had decided. It wasn't his to ask. He understood, better than most, that some decisions were complete in the making of them, and didn't require announcement or audience. He reached behind the table and produced a pint of strawberries. He set them between them on the table's edge. She looked at them, and then at him, and something moved between them. Old and patient, and neither of them quite ready to name it yet, but present in the way that real things are present. Without performance, without urgency, simply there. Aileen told me, Alicia said with the ghost of something almost like a smile, that I have to taste them before I buy them, that it's the rule. Strong suggestion, Oliver said. She said you'd say that. He picked up a strawberry and handed it to her. She ate it. She looked at Route 9. He looked at Route 9. The morning continued in its quiet and unhurried way, the way mornings do when a man has held his line and told his truth, and is still standing on the same gravel shoulder he was standing on before the trouble came, with his permit in order and his daughter's drawing pinned to the canopy, and the particular peace of a man who has nothing to hide because he never did. That afternoon, when Aileen came home from school, she walked into the kitchen and found a jar of strawberry preserves on the table with a small handwritten note beside it that said, "For Aileen and her dad. From someone who failed the quality control test once and intends to do better." Aileen read it twice. She looked at her father. "Who's A?" "A friend," Oliver said. She looked at the jar. She looked at the note. She looked at him with those green eyes that missed absolutely nothing and saw, in his face, whatever it was she was looking for. Then she picked up the jar and carried it carefully to the refrigerator and put it on the middle shelf where the good things went. And she said, "Okay, but she still has to do the taste test." "I'll let her know," Oliver said. Aileen nodded, satisfied with the terms, and went to change out of her school clothes. Oliver stood in the kitchen in the late afternoon light. The small, honest kitchen of a man who had made difficult choices and lost certain things and kept the most important thing. And he felt, quietly and without ceremony, the specific and complete relief of a life that has been lived without apology and defended without shame, and that remains, after everything, entirely his own. Outside on Route 9, the traffic moved. The stand was closed for the day. Tomorrow he would open at 6:15. He would arrange the peaches. He would make change. He would be exactly where he had said he would be. He always was.